Hi, this is Lucy B, and this is Science from Above. Sometimes I just love to go in and tell my own God stories, and we all have them, whether we admit it or not. Had one that was just really crazy, insane. So me and my husband had been married for a really long time. Doctors just said, there's just no way you're going to have kids. Basically, my tubes were clogged, all that. And they offered, needed to do the in vitro, and we decided against that. So I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and I thought, it's fine. I'm kind of the cool aunt anyway. Just kidding. But I was okay with it. And my husband was completely okay with it. And we thought, we'll retire, we'll travel, it'll be fine. This is what God wants, it's going to be fine. So we had been married for years. And all of a sudden, I end up pregnant. And, quite honestly, I couldn't even believe it. I didn't believe it. I swore it was wrong. And I looked at my husband and I said, regrettably now, but I said, I don't know if I want it. Now, let me tell you right now, I do not believe in abortion. So that was not even an option. I was going to keep the baby. I just didn't know at the time that I actually wanted a baby, because in my mind I had accepted this. We're never having kids, and made plans beyond that. So abortion was not an option, just so you're aware. I don't believe in it. My husband didn't, again, I said, I don't know if I want it. And he said, well, it's a little too late for that now. And so I went through this pregnancy, and I ended up having to go to a high-risk doctor. Crazy enough is this high-risk doctor, I was full of fluids and all this. And on another note, we decided not to find out the sex of our baby throughout this too. And I had heard that sometimes, actually from a psychologist, that told me that it is proven that if you find out the sex of your baby and secretly wanted the other sex than what you were pregnant with, that the pregnancy tends to be harder. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I was already terrified of giving birth to this baby. The thought of it terrified me. And so I didn't want to find out what it is. So there was a few times that I ended up having to go to the doctor. They told us they didn't honestly know if the baby even had Down syndrome, and a symptom of that was the high levels of fluid that were in with the baby. And I seriously thought, okay, we have a chance that this baby may have Down syndrome. I didn't know. I just trusted God. But again, I was more terrified of giving birth than anything, which is so terrible, I know. I then had a conversation. Me and my husband were talking, and I just said, if they just put me to sleep and took the baby out, I'd be perfectly fine. Well, my husband said, I'd be okay with that too, because I may pass out when you have this baby. So, crazy enough, when the day before we had the baby, the high-risk doctor made a mistake and said, your little girl looks great. Day before, we had waited this whole time, and the doctor the day before tells us our little girl is okay. So I was a little like, oh great, now I'm really going to have this hard pregnancy, because really I didn't even know what I wanted. I really didn't care, but I thought maybe secretly in my head I want a boy. I don't know. So the next day ended up going into labor. Actually, it was so weird because I was laying in bed and this fluid came out. And I mean, I've heard about your water breaking, but I thought it went everywhere, and mine just looked like I just kind of peed the bed a little bit. Well, you guys, I started getting these cramps, and they were pretty intense, and I'm like, this is different. So we went to the doctor, and as soon as we get to the hospital, you guys, seriously, my cramps completely stopped. And so I'm fine, and they're checking me, and they asked me if my water broke, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I just peed the bed, because I'm like, I have 0 cramps now. How embarrassing, but I may have just peed the bed. Anyway, so what happened was they found out that my water broke, but just part way, and so they had to admit me. So I'm sitting in the hospital. I'm like, this is pretty great. This is fine. It was fine. I know I'm probably the biggest weenie, but I also hate shots. Completely hate shots. But they did increase my contractions later on, and I know. I don't even know what it is like to get to a 10. I was at a 5 and was in immense pain. So when they came in for an epidural, I'm like, do whatever you gotta do. I didn't even care. In my regular state of mind, that would have flipped me out knowing that goes in my spine. I honestly I didn't care what they did to me. And so they gave me the epidural. And then I'm just sitting on this bounce and just bouncing on the ball, just in my own world. And they finally get me up on the bed. And my husband, he's like, hey, I'm going to go down and get something to eat. Okay, whatever. I couldn't eat, but I really didn't have an appetite anyway. So he left while the nurse was checking me. So when the nurse checked me, she all of a sudden panicked but didn't say anything. I had no idea what was going on. And she went over, she sounded the alarm, literally still had no idea what was going on. I knew that it was an emergency. Well, my husband, he comes back up from the cafeteria and he sees an alarm going off, and he says, whew, feel sorry for whoever that is. Well, come to find out it was on my room. He walks in and just sees all of the nurses around me. They didn't have a doctor at the time that was there. So my husband goes over and he sits by the window, and I didn't say anything. I wasn't moving. I had no idea what was going on, and I just looked at him, and I knew I had tears coming down my eyes, but I knew not to do anything, not to freak out, because they were the professionals. I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want to take the chance of losing this baby. And he got teary-eyed and looked at me and just kind of mouthed, hey, it's going to be okay. And I shook my head. Yeah. Okay. Well, they wheeled me off with every staff member up in the maternity ward and takes me off. I had no idea what was going on. I had not a clue. I had no idea. And found out a lot later on. But luckily I had that epidural because they were doing all kinds of stuff that I'm really glad I couldn't feel nothing. So anyway, what they did was they took me to get an emergency C-section. And I just remember the nurse looking at me and says, your baby's going to be okay. And I just kind of shook my head. Yeah. And I was out. Side note, they told me I was probably going to have a 10-pound baby. So I fully expected to be a 10-pound baby. Me and my husband were both over 9 pounds. We were little chunkers. So I expected we're probably going to have a big baby. Well, when I woke up, I just kind of was out of it. And the nurses kind of look at me and they said, "You have a beautiful little girl." And I said, "How big was she?" And they said, 8 pounds, 2 ounces. And I said, "Oh, she's little." And they started laughing and they're like, "That's a good sized baby." But in my mind thinking, she's 2 pounds smaller than what I thought she was going to be. Anyway, what had happened is I had a prolapse cord. This is kind of where the umbilical cord comes out, and my daughter wasn't receiving anything, any oxygen. And they did this Apgar test, which is kind of just basically what the vitals are of the baby and how well that they're doing. Well, she had 2 of them, and her first one came back as all zeros. She was dead when she was born, and they revived her. So many miracles happened during this time. There was no doctors there. There was only me and another woman who were in labor at that time. And so it was at night. They had no doctors there. These nurses basically had to do what they could do. And by God's grace, some doctor that wasn't even my doctor, that came just to come and check on her patient just out of the blue, they grabbed her and she did a C-section, and my scar is all messed up, which is fine. But she was able to get my daughter out, and if she would have been any later, she barely survived as it is, right? Like I said, her Apgar was all zeros. She wasn't even alive. And the fact that this woman came in the nick of time, literally, and saved my baby, is a blessing in herself. And this cute little doctor is just telling me how sorry she is, and extremely sorry for what that my scar all messed up. I was like, "Oh, believe me, I could care less about that." Like, you saved my daughter, I don't care. Another miracle in this whole thing is that they told us that we may have some mental disabilities with our daughter, and it was actually pretty high, and that we could see signs clear up to the age of 5. Our little girl now, she's 9 years old, and so smart that she is in 3rd grade, but she is doing 4th grade work, and they have her in higher levels in the grade, and she's just such a smart little thing, and just an amazing kid. But the whole thing is that, like, the grace of God and how everything just worked out. And for some reason, it was like having that faith, but having a peace along the way, and me and my husband, going back to the whole conversation that we had, I'm like, if I was knocked out, that would just be the best scenario. And my husband saying, "Yeah, well, if I'm in there, I'm going to pass out." Well, the whole thing about it is I was knocked out. He wasn't in the room. So, I mean, it was just God all over it. We never thought we would have a daughter. Oh my goodness. I'm just like, what would we ever do without this kid? She's just so amazing. She loves Jesus. She has the biggest heart. She makes these little videos for people to spread the word. And it's just like seeing this little blessing that God completely put her here to spread the word and to share his love, and through her to others. And it's just, like I said, I mean, we all could probably brag about our kids. So, but it's just how he worked everything through, just ways that I never imagined. And not knowing how badly, even though we thought we're fine. We didn't need a kid. And how badly that we did need this little girl that has just brightened our marriage, our lives, and just completely thankful for her. And it's God all over, all over the whole thing. It's kind of like, again, just one of those God stories that I just love to share. And I know that for the mothers out there, that we all have our own birthing stories. And I had like that prolapse cord, and the chances of that happening, from what the doctors told me, was that it was a 0.06% chance of that happening. And in fact, our sweet little nurse that we had that found it at the time, she sent me flowers the next day. I think it just frightened the tar out of her. And she never had that happen. They very, very ever, even if they even have ever saw that. And so, it's just, God was all over it and answered prayers. And again, even down to I know we weren't in there, but it was probably best for us that it happened the way that it did. And there was one other family there. They were a completely different race than what we are. So we know our baby is our baby as well. But I always like to go back to the verse where Jesus is talking about in Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. So you guys, God is so cool, how even he gives us things we don't even know, and how he blesses us with these little gifts that we didn't even think that we need, and how he just protects us in ways that we have no idea. And so that's my story, and love sharing it. I love even just reminiscing about the whole thing, and how, again, what a scary time, but yet a peaceful, trusting time. So we have an amazing God. We serve an amazing God. We just got to make sure we always continue to give him glory. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Talk to you later. Bye.